Welcome to episode 19 of Published. Today I'll be speaking with Jill Grunewald and Lisa Markley, the co-authors of the Essential Thyroid Cookbook.
Welcome to Published, a podcast by Greenleaf Book Group, where we'll discuss the ins and outs of the publishing industry, from writing a book and finding the right publisher, to gearing up for a book launch. And now, here's your host, Greenleaf Book Group CEO, Tanya Hall.
Welcome back to another episode of Published. So one of our favorite things to do on this show is to bring you stories direct from the authors so that you can learn from their publishing experiences and get some advice straight from the horse's mouth. So today I'm excited to share with you the story of Jill Grunewald and Lisa Markley. Lisa is a dietitian and culinary nutrition expert, and Jill is a functional medicine certified health coach with a specialist in thyroid health and Hashimoto's. So together they wrote the Essential Thyroid Cookbook, which is a definitive guide for anyone who has wanted to cook confidently for thyroid and immune function, but perhaps didn't know where to start. Labor of love for sure, and this book came out of their own struggles with thyroid and Hashimoto's in particular. So creating a cookbook is certainly no easy task. It requires recipe testing and food styling, photography, graphic design, and there was certainly a lot to that process for Jill and Lisa. So today we're going to talk about what they looked for when choosing a publisher, as well as how they worked with their designer to bring a vision to life. So let's get into the interview. Welcome, Jill and Lisa.
Hi, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So you guys, obviously writing a book is a challenge in and of itself, but you took it a step further and decided to do a cookbook, which is a bit more complicated for various reasons. So can you tell us why you decided to write a book and what your specific goals were in doing so?
Sure. This is Lisa. And at the time, I had been teaching cooking and nutrition classes for close to a decade. And, I pretty much lived in the kitchen. And I was struggling. I have Hashimoto's, and I was struggling with some pretty severe symptoms at the time. And Jill's been a longtime friend of mine, and she, I knew, was, basically having a lot of success with coaching her clients that had Hashimoto's back to health. So I had reached out to her for support along my path of healing. And when I took a class from her, I realized there was some really great nutrition information she was sharing. And I thought, I always think of, well, how can I translate this information to the plate to make it tangible and practical in my own home kitchen and for my students when I'm teaching classes? And so I had told her, we should take your information and develop a cookbook, because there's really a void in this area. And she knew that too, that there really weren't a lot of resources that she could share with her clients on basically helping empower them to get back in their kitchen and do the self-care of cooking for themselves in a certain way, eating more whole foods, eating foods that specifically nourish thyroid and immune health. And so we decided to create that.
Awesome. So it was very much sort of out of servitude. It sounds like servitude may not be the right word, but trying to pay it forward, I suppose, to others who might be dealing with the same issues.
Yeah, it was a resource we felt we needed for ourselves and that we felt would help people that we interacted with and on a daily basis. We did it to kind of help change lives as well as to challenge ourselves and going into a new realm. And, it's a very creative process. So we wanted to have fun with it. And, it just kind of unfolded from there, just out of kind of almost like a passion project. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that process, because it might be daunting to some who are thinking of doing a cookbook, because again, it is a more complicated process, and I imagine just figuring out where to start can be a challenge. So can you tell us about the process and anything that you might do differently if you had to do it again?
This is Jill, and I guess for me, so I wrote the educational component of the book, and Lisa and I collaborated very, very intimately on the whole project, but writing it's essentially a book within a cookbook, and we've gotten a lot of great feedback from our readers, how much they love that aspect, that it's not, the recipes are wonderful, but there's a lot of education in the book. And for me, it was really an intense process of writing that educational component. And I was talking with one of my author friends here in Minneapolis at the beginning of my journey, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, where do I start? And he laughed and said, just the same way you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. And I guess to answer the question, what would I do differently? I think I would schedule my time better. There were significant chunks of time where both Lisa and I just had to step away from the project for various reasons. And I felt like, at least in the initial stages, I was doing it, but I wasn't doing it very efficiently. I was kind of doing it in fits and starts. And there came a point where I did have to leave home. Like, I had friends who had a cabin, and, I had to leave home and basically go on a writing hermitage. And I don't want to say if I had to do it differently, I wouldn't overthink it, because I think overthinking it helped the book to be as successful as it has been. But there was a level of obsession and just singular focus and intensity. And I think next time I would probably be a little easier on myself.
Well, that's good advice, definitely. And so when you talk about scheduling your time, are you saying perhaps be more disciplined about carving that out in your schedule?
Yeah, I think discipline is probably the right word. I mean, I have a lot of discipline, generally speaking, but I also have another business, and Lisa and I both have small kids. So it was kind of like juggling all of that. And that was a challenge. It was a challenge and that's part of the reason I had to leave home. And, bless my husband, he was willing to take care of our, at the time, baby girl while I was away. And that was really hard, to be away from her. But the book wasn't going to get done if I didn't leave. Mm-hmm. So
as far as the writing and the of the recipes and the photography piece, because like Jill said, it's a book within a cookbook, so there's a lot to it, and we kind of put our brains together and ended up with quite a bit of content. So when I sought out how to approach the recipes, I tried to land on a number, what would be a good goal to work towards, and we worked towards about 100 recipes. I think there's about 109 total recipes in the book, and just to kind of whittle it down from there, I decided on the chapter headings and set a goal of writing 10 recipes per chapter heading, so 10 breakfasts, 10 appetizers, 10 soups, but ended up having more in each most of those categories. But just was really looking at the project as a whole, trying to think of how to have a variety of the foods, a variety of seasonal foods, a variety of cooking techniques, addressing different levels of ability. Although most of our recipes are good for the novice cook, we wanted to make sure, that there were plenty in there that were pretty straightforward and able to be made in 30 minutes or less. So I had to kind of think about the practicality of it for our readers. Always think about it from a beginner's mind. Even though I've been spending years in the kitchen, how could I make this as simple and straightforward for the people that are going to pick it up and read it? And I think Jill did that too with the nutrition education piece and how she broke down, the content that she shared as well.
That's a really good point, and something that's a drum we're always beating here in terms of making sure you know who your reader is or who your readers are. There may be a few different levels of reader, and sometimes it's hard when you're so close to your own expertise to take that step back and address it for the layman.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons it was good to work together on this, because, Jill, when she read through my recipes, she would ask me questions that I hadn't thought about and things, can we do this or can we tweak that to maybe adapt it to, somebody who can't have this kind of food. And, based on her kind of coaching and her coaching practice and things she's heard from her clients directly, we were really able to try to fine tune and address certain situations that might come up and make some really good suggestions for how to tackle different scenarios or different situations.
Mm-hmm. Great. That's great. So when you were finished with that process and ready to find a publisher, what were you looking for?
This is Jill. We actually did not seek a publisher initially. we were several years down the path of self-publishing, and we were sought out by one of the top publishers in the world, which was very flattering and surprising, and it kind of dropped a bomb on our plans in a good way. And we had just announced our publication date, and I think it was 48 hours later, not because of that announcement, but just sort of coincidentally, we were approached, and we thoroughly explored that potential opportunity. I mean, we, put a hold on everything that we were doing at that time and really investigated whether or not it would be the right thing for us to do. And ultimately, for a number of reasons, we decided it wasn't the right thing for us, and we turned our attention back to Greenleaf. So we had known about Greenleaf for a while because of our friend Melissa Jewel Wan. And Lisa and I just decided, hey, let's give Greenleaf another look. And Melissa said, just call him. Just pick up the phone and call him and tell him, that you know me. And the rest is history. We're super happy with that choice. And there was just such a high level of customer service. And Lisa and I are both extremely picky. And you guys are also extremely picky. And we appreciated that we had to go through an application process. Mm-hmm. And we march to the beat of our own drum, and we feel like Greenleaf marches to the beat of their own drum. And for those sort of philosophical reasons, we felt like it was a great fit. And yeah, we've been super happy with every step of the process.
Well, thank you. That's awesome to hear. I really appreciate that feedback, and we're super happy to have you, obviously.
Thank you.
So in terms of four-color books, as we call them, and for people who don't know what that means, that's basically an illustrated book, something with what you would see as full-color pictures, probably, if you're the layman. Those can be particularly challenging on the design side, and quite often the authors who come to us and choose Greenleaf to do a four-color book have some very clear vision of how their book will look when it's done. Because we have such a collaborative process, often it's a good choice for them. So let's talk about the design process and the input that you guys had on that front, and how important was the control there for you?
It was, having a sense of control, or like you said, ability to collaborate and feel like our voices were being heard was very important to us, because Jill and I are both very creative people, and very visual and how we express ourselves to our clients and the work that we do. We feel like people really connect with what they see, and we're talking about food, and you kind of eat with your eyes first. So, and when we're talking about books, who's going to pick up a book that doesn't look beautiful? So we knew that was going to be very important in terms of attracting people to pick up and look through our book. And so when we initially started talking to you all and really finding that like our needs immediately were being met through the high level of customer service, and when we started working with your lead designer, Neil, we really felt like he was listening to all of our thoughts, ideas, needs, and requests, and not just kind of telling us what we wanted to hear, but maybe coming back and saying, well, this is the best practice on how to do this particular type of layout, or but also was very nimble and flexible when we needed him to be, to kind of suit our vision of the book. So it was more of a conversation. We got to kind of work collaboratively, like you said, and let it unfold from there. It wasn't like you need to do it this way and you have no input. There was just a lot of kind of back and forth. And so, some of that took a little bit more time, because this whole process was definitely not linear. It was like there is a lot of back and forth when you're creating something and when you're collaborating with people. But we had the advantage of putting our best minds together to kind of create this beautiful product in the end.
This is Jill. If I could add to that, when we started working with Greenleaf, we were already, well down the path of design. We had a cover, and we had a basic blad, basically out in design. And Neil was able to take that baton with no ego. You know, he was just so easygoing about picking up where we had left off, basically, and making things even better. So the people who we had worked with on design prior to engaging with Greenleaf were, you know, wonderful and talented, and, you know, we loved them dearly. And then when we transitioned to working with Neil, he took that beautiful book cover and made a couple of minor tweaks and just made it pop. I mean, it was just so much better. And I don't want to speak, you know, I mean, like I said, the previous designers we had were wonderful, but he took things to the next level. And then, like Lisa said, he was just so collaborative with us and very easygoing. And we even got into, you know, some pretty, I don't want to say intense conversations, but I mean, we were even down to the level of, you know, should we put a space on each side of the M dash? And he gave us his opinion, which we ultimately did end up going with, of course. But, you know, he gave us that flexibility of, well, some people do and some people don't, but here's my opinion. So it wasn't like my way or the highway. There wasn't any ego involved. It was just such an enjoyable process.
Yeah, that's great to hear, and that's how we approach design for sure. It's very iterative, and I loved what you said about the cover and how just those few tweaks can really make it pop, because there's something magical about that. I think especially for those of us who are not designers, to see it can blow your mind when you just a little minor change, whether it's a font or a color. Sometimes the difference is just tremendous and can make the difference in the success of the book.
Yeah, it blew my mind.
Okay. Well, good. Okay, so fun question. What's your favorite recipe from the book?
I'll start. I really love the maple miso tahini sauce. There's a whole chapter on condiments, sauces, and seasonings, and I always feel like if you have a jar of something like a fresh salad dressing, or, you know, something you can sprinkle on your food just to kind of perk it up a bit, that it can take something that's kind of bland and boring like a chicken breast and really elevate it with a lot of flavor. And so every week I'll make something, and maple miso tahini sauce is usually kind of my go-to sauce that I make, that I can drizzle over chicken or roasted veggies or use as a salad dressing. I really love, you know, the versatility of having something like that on hand.
Yeah, sounds delicious.
This is Jill, and I have to say, I'm just kind of chuckling because Lisa had said early on that one of her favorite chapters in the recipe portion of the book was the condiments, sauces, and seasonings chapter. And I was like, oh, that's interesting, because there's so many other great, you know, plant-based sides and main dishes, etc. But my favorite recipe is also actually a condiment, which is the Brazil nut Parmesan. I use that on so many different dishes. I mean, I even put it on spaghetti a couple of nights ago. It tastes like cheese. So it's made with Brazil nuts and nutritional yeast and salt and garlic salt, or garlic powder, I should say. And it is just, you can massage it into kale. You can basically use it anywhere that you would sprinkle cheese. Mm-hmm. I've put it on vegetables. There's a recipe in the book for the Brazil nut. Sorry, Lisa, I'm probably not saying the title correctly, but the chicken tenders, the Parmesan chicken tenders. So that is a recipe in the book that uses that condiment, but I've put it on many, many other things, and we've gotten a lot of feedback about that recipe too, that people are just loving it.
Awesome. So any other advice for people who might be considering doing a cookbook?
I would say, keep a notebook in the kitchen. And one of the things when I kind of first set out on developing the recipes is, having had so much time and experience already being in the kitchen as much as I wasn't really sure how to approach the whole recipe testing process and recipe creation, because it was just something that came naturally to me, but it's not something that I was very good about writing down and accounting for. And making notes of. So when I started developing the recipes for the cookbook, I had to have a process with that, where I was keeping track of my thoughts and ideas, because I'd get these ideas based on different types of inspiration, whether it was what season we were transitioning into, or what I saw at the farmer's market, or what was on sale at the grocery store. And, when you spend time in your right brain creating things, it's very different than, kind of accounting for and being more in your left brain about keeping track of things and measuring things out. But the end goal is, if you're going to be sharing recipes with your audience, you have to really make them in a way that are going to be reproducible. So you do have to learn how to balance both sides of your brain and keep track, but also have a place to write down your ideas and your inspiration. So it's almost like keeping a journal, in a way. And then you can always go back to it and see if there's just so many permutations of different types of recipes that you can create that, when I go back to some of my notebooks and things, I can be like, oh, well, I can make this type of muffin based on the blueberry muffins that are in the cookbook. I just developed a lemon poppy seed muffin for this spring, and just kind of used a recipe I'd already created as a starting point. So just kind of finding your process, and how to be creative with developing the recipes and getting organized around it.
This is Jill, and I would say, first of all, if you would have told me a few years ago that I would be writing a cookbook, I would have laughed, because writing and developing recipes is certainly not my strong suit, but clearly it is Lisa's, and so we've been, I feel like, perfect partners in this. And when we first started on this journey several years ago, one of the first things I said to her was, I don't want anyone to ever look at this cookbook and say, this is just another cookbook. Like, these recipes are great, but how do I know that these recipes are uniquely thyroid supportive? And hence, what came from that is the substantive educational component. And we spent many, many weeks prior to even creating any content for the book itself, creating our nutritional springboard, which was all the nerdy research that we did around thyroid and immune supportive nutrition, so that people would know that the recipes are uniquely thyroid and immune supportive. So we've had a few people reach out to us since our book got published about how it's not just a cook. So, for example, one of my friends is interested in writing a cookbook, but she said, I want to do what you guys did. I want to create a hybrid book. And I had never thought of our book as a hybrid book before. But you could basically take the educational component, and that could be a book in and of itself as far as the educational content. And we've received a lot of accolades and a lot of praise for not only Lisa's amazing, easy to prepare, delicious recipes, but also the why behind those recipes. So I'm not saying that everyone who's seeking to write a cookbook needs to write that substantive of an educational component, but we've received a lot of positive feedback that people appreciate the recipes more because they know where they came from. They know the science and the research that went into those ingredients. So I'm not necessarily offering advice like, everyone who writes a cookbook has to do that, but it was really important to us. And I think it has been one of the reasons that the book has been so successful.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier in terms of knowing your audience. And in this case, you guys are crystal clear on what they need. And it's not just the recipes, it's the insight into how it's supporting their health.
And we did some myth busting, which felt really good.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us today. It was very interesting to hear about your process, and we're so pleased that you're as happy as you are with the outcome of the book.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for all of your support. It's been fantastic.
Oh, thank you. Well, that's it for this episode of Published. Thank you to Lisa and Jill for joining me today. For notes from today's show, go to greenleafbookgroup.com/episode 19. And if you liked today's episode, go ahead and subscribe on iTunes.
Thanks for listening to Published. To learn more, please visit greenleafbookgroup.com. And remember to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes.